Thanks for joining us on Not Boring CEs, where we don't think you should be bored to death while getting your continuing ed. Keep listening here, then hop over to notboringces.com to get all your online CE credits. All right, y'all, let's get to learning. Whitney Owens has a master in professional counseling and has been practicing for over 14 years as a clinical mental health therapist. Her area of clinical focus is mental health counseling for anxious professionals. Whitney trains therapists to use the Enneagram in private practice with their clients and coworkers. In addition, Whitney specializes in helping therapists use faith in their work with clients, as well as in helping therapists start and grow faith-based practices. Welcome, Whitney. Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I'm here with Whitney Owens, and we are going to be talking about incorporating your faith into your clinical work. Scratch that, start over. It's not your faith. It's faith. Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I'm here with Whitney Owens. We're going to be talking about incorporating faith in your clinical work, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Whitney, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Allison.
Yeah, so first, I want to talk about what we can do as clinicians to kind of identify our own negative distortions regarding faith, and how that can like leak into our work as a therapist and our work as a business owner.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's very similar to the ways that we already deal with all the other things that kind of run into our business. Faith is just another aspect of it. So much of us as therapists is doing our own work, right? Doing our own work surrounding how we think about our faith, being honest about it. I think a lot of times we feel, especially in the community of faith, like this facade. I have to have all the answers. I can't doubt anything. Well, that's just simply not true. And if you act that way, you're going to miss something. So being able to acknowledge that. And so that might mean that you're meeting with a small group that you're talking about this with. You have your own therapist. You're doing your own research about your faith background to understand it more clearly. Or maybe you're meeting with a leader within the religious organization, something like that, that you're asking these questions to. But what we don't want to do is pretend like we have it all together, because that's actually when we miss it. Right. And our clients surely don't have it all together. And so if they're coming into the room and they're bringing up something that stirs us up, we need to make sure that we're taking that extra step to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious too about how this plays out if someone is working with someone of another faith that you might have a bias around or lack of understanding or education around. What do you usually recommend for people?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's important that you are doing your own research, right? And so if someone's coming in with a faith that you don't understand, you can certainly spend some time doing research on that, talking to other therapists that work with that type of faith background. I also will just tell the person, hey, I don't quite understand what you're bringing to the table, but I actually want you to tell me more about it. Tell me about how you incorporate that practice into your life. What kind of places do you go to have like community within your faith background? And they're sharing with us. So it's kind of, we're doing both. They're sharing their story. I'm doing my research. Now, I think that if you are really stirred up that, they bring something that you don't believe in, then you still need to make space for them. Like that's still not about you sharing what you think. It's about bringing their things to the table and helping them. You're guiding them regardless of what you truly think. And obviously in some rare circumstances, I do think it's appropriate to refer out. But I think for the most part, like it really is pointing to the fact that you as a therapist need to be doing your own work and your ability to accept people where they're at instead of being judgmental, which sadly enough, we find that a lot in the faith community, a lot of judgment.
Yeah. When I'm thinking about the judgment piece, and I might just be making a big assumption just based on the way I feel about judgment in general, is sometimes when we're feeling judgment, we don't have a lot of insight around the fact that it's us, it's not the thing we're judging or the person we're judging. Are there some kind of like red flags that we could be on the lookout inside ourselves that might be an indication that like this is our stuff, whether it's faith-based or not, around judgment?
Yeah, no, I don't think that you're out of line there. I think it's very common. and I, you know, even though we're talking about faith in general, I do come from a Christian background. And
Mhm.
sadly, I see that even more and more in the Christian community. This is why people don't go to church. They feel judged by church. So if a Christian therapist is in the room, they're probably going to feel judged by that Christian therapist. I mean, all the time we have people, we'll actually have some people call and they want a Christian perspective. And that's great. And we like incorporate that. And we have other people that call, they're like, do not put me with a Christian therapist, you know,
Uh-huh.
like because they've had that negative experience. So why are people having all these negative experiences? Those therapists aren't seeing those red flags. And I think one of those big red flags is strong emotions, like
Hmm.
anger. Like
Yeah.
anger will rise up quickly, defensiveness. If we're finding those within ourselves, that's when we need to go to supervision. Hey,
Hmm.
I'm feeling angry towards my client, right? I think a lot of people feel, I don't know if vendetta is really the right word, but they feel like it's their duty. Duty is a good one. Like it's their duty to set people in the right faith path, right?
Right.
How
Yeah.
arrogant. How arrogant that this person thinks they know, right? And I
Hmm.
think as therapists, like if we get to a point where we think we know what the client needs to do, that's a red flag. I mean, there are definitely dangerous situations. And of course, you know, I mean, we're talking about when the client's going to hurt themselves or someone else. Yes, there is a very clear path of what they need to do. But when it comes to them figuring out their faith and their values, like we don't necessarily have the answer. And I do think that a lot of faith communities teach that, like, this is the answer. So then people are kind of inundated with that. And then they bring that in the therapy room, and that's scary.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious how, because there are a lot of sects, I guess, within different faith communities where like it is reinforced throughout your entire life that this is like it is your job to bring more people into this faith. How do clinicians who are a part of those faith communities keep their practice separate from this belief that it is part of their job as a good Christian or a good in some like other kind of cultures like religious sects, I guess, that this is the answer. It is the right thing to help other people find eternal life in heaven.
Yeah. So this was me for a very long time in my life.
Hmm.
When I went to graduate school, I came from kind of an evangelical, conservative background. And when I became a therapist, my thought was, I am going to change everyone for Jesus. You know,
Hmm.
every client that comes into my office, I'm going to share the gospel. They're going to know God. It's going to be awesome and do God's work in the world, right?
Hmm.
And then in one of my courses, I actually went to a program that had, we did therapy classes, counseling, professional counseling classes, but we also had some theology classes alongside that. And so it was a Christian program. And this guy said Jesus never imposed his faith on anyone, he invited people into faith. And that really hit me hard.
Hmm.
So I think that's such an important point that we invite people into things. We don't force people into things. Just as therapists, like I might say, you know, cognitive behavior therapy would be great for this anxiety issue. Here's a couple of tips. Well, it's an invitation for the client to use those. I'm not forcing what I think is best on them. They are the expert in the room. They know what's best. So I
Hmm.
think faith is the same way. Like you might, obviously, we want to find out their faith background, but we might say, hey, you know, have you ever considered praying through this situation? I'm not saying you got to pray through this situation. We're inviting them to that. And then they have a choice in that. And so I think we've got to change our mindset about what faith really is. It's not rules, it's not regulations, it's not something that we have to force on people because it's the only way to live their life. It's a place of love, community, invitation. And I think if we can change our mindset around that, it's going to change the way we work with those clients.
Hmm. And I think it would be helpful here to kind of back up because I know you well, like we've done a million podcasts together. I feel like I know and understand how your practice, your group practice works. Um, But let's talk some about introducing the faith conversation. Like, when does that even happen with your clients? You have a faith-based group practice. So there's like, how do you advertise that so people coming in know and understand that that's available to them, but not forced on them? Talk us through
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, great question. Sorry for all the noise. Um, so I think a really good way to start that is through your messaging. It's how you market your practice, what is on your website. These are where people are going to go first. So you want to make sure that your branding is incorporating the way that you integrate faith on your website. So for my practice, we are a faith-based practice, but we are not overt in our messaging about that. And I want to draw in all different types of clients. It doesn't mean that someone shouldn't be overt in their messaging if that's what they want to do, but I'm not as overt about it. Now, we do have a page on our site, Christian counseling page, and I think that that's helpful because there might be people out there looking for that service, but it's not center. It's not the first thing they see on the homepage. It's not part of the tagline. So some people are finding it that way. Then when they call the practice, we don't necessarily bring it up, but I live in the South, and a lot of times people do ask about that if that's something that they're looking for. And it's great because we want to know what clients are looking for so that we can match them with the therapist that is an expert in that area. So we have some of our therapists at the group practice that are more overt about their faith and more integrative. We have some other ones that are less so. So we can put them with the best fit therapist for their needs. So then when they come in for their first session, we have an intake that they get in advance and we review in that first session. And it goes through lots of different areas. So it's a substance abuse area, medical area, education, work, legal issues, family background, all the things. So one of the areas is spirituality. It's pretty simple. It says, do you consider yourself to be a spiritual person? Yes or no? Do you attend a faith-based community? Yes or no? And if so, what community is that? And then what are the practices that you have in your life for your faith? So that we can kind of gauge where they're at. And so when I'm going through that intake and I'm going through each section, when we get to that section, I'll say, hey, tell me more about your background here. Like, how were you raised? Because we all know that that's going to impact the way we live our lives today. And is this something that you want to talk about in therapy? So even if they say, hey, I'm Jewish, blah, 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 I'll say, well, do you want to talk about your Jewish faith in therapy? Like, do you want to integrate that? Some people would say, no. I mean, I get that with Christians too. No, I don't want to talk about faith. But most of the time, that's a part of their lives. We're holistic beings and they do want to talk about that. So what I love about it is it's an invitation again. This is your therapy. Do you want to do this? It's not that I'm saying we are going to do this.
Right.
Right. I'm inviting them. I want to share another story really quick. Another therapist that I know, she was, and this goes back to the importance of your messaging and sharing with clients in advance is really important. So she found a therapist and she went for her first appointment. Nothing in the messaging on the website, in the intake paperwork, the informed consent, nothing said faith-based. She got in the room and there was faith-based stuff everywhere, like crosses, pictures of Jesus staring at her while she was sitting on the sofa. And she felt so uncomfortable. And she left after 20 minutes.
Wow.
And the therapist kept talking about religion and creation and talking about the creation story. I don't know all the details, but it was a terrible experience for her. Now, fortunately, this is a therapist, so she's probably going to find someone else and she understands that. But a lot of people, that's it. They'll never go back to therapy. And it's so unfortunate. And so that therapist doesn't see that she is pushing her agenda, even by having images in her office. And how does a client experience that?
Right. And I think about, clients with religious trauma and how terrifying it would be to walk into that room and depending on your personality and how you survived or grew up, like this sitting down and starting anyway, even when everything in your body probably wants to turn the other way.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up trauma. And a lot of therapists, we might not be thinking about that, but religious trauma is so real. And then a lot of time, religious trauma really stems back from the leader usually that created some kind of trauma for someone. And we know trauma can look so different in a lot of different areas. But a lot of times someone was a member of a church and they felt like their leader put something on them or emotionally, physically, abusive. You can see how the therapy relationship can model that.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is something we have got to be aware of with our clients. And so again, if we try to force our agenda, even if it's not very intensely on them, they can sense it. They can feel it. And then we are re-giving them that trauma again. So for them to come in and experience someone who pulls back, who invites them, who says, it's okay. This is your therapy. It's your faith and the way you want to live it is a corrective experience for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking about like how to align your values while incorporating the appropriate ethical principles and diversity within your work and life, and how like kind of having a mission statement, maybe not as formal as a mission statement, maybe as formal as a mission statement to kind of guide that. How would you work with therapists to start to create that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So definitely want to explore with a therapist why they started their practice.
Hmm.
You know, who is their niche client? That's going to lead us to come up with some kind of tagline and value statement, maybe a mission statement. But again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's making sure that mission statement is respectful and understanding to clients. And I think that when we have an agenda, that mission statement can be distorted, right? And we don't even see that it's being distorted. So potentially a good thing that a therapist could do with that, either working with a business consultant that's helping them see like, hey, here's some other ways that someone might see this, or giving it out to some people and letting them read it. Now, here's what's important, that you're not just giving it to all the same people within your faith community that are all going to believe the same thing that you believe. Okay.
Right.
Fit your mission statement to someone who's not of your faith background. In fact, I do it with multiple people not of your faith background, but also some people of your faith background, because those are the people maybe you're trying to draw into therapy. But get someone that thinks differently than you to read what you're doing,
Hmm.
right? Get someone who's different than you to go to your website. The problem is we all just look for people that think like us because we want that affirmation, and those are the communities that we're in, and then we're missing it again.
Hmm.
So I think that it's really important that if you're going to make kind of like identify your values, but also have someone that has different values look at it and see how you're communicating that. And I think that will really help you better define it.
Yeah. I think about that, like inviting somebody with a different belief system to look at it. I can imagine it can get a little hairy. Like if there's something you feel very attached to within your mission statement, and somebody else is pointing out that this is less welcoming to people of other faiths, or um, like how do you navigate that when it is your core belief, it is really important to you, and it is something that you put in there purposefully when you're getting feedback that it's not what you meant for it to be or do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you explore it,
Hmm.
explore your emotions around it, explore why you had resistance pop up when someone brought something to your attention. And then you kind of decide what you want to do with it from there,
Hmm.
right? I, I think what I have been learning in my own journey, kind of how I was sharing with you at the very beginning, I was like, this is the agenda. I'm going to get everybody saved, you know? And as I've grown, just realizing that like community is not about being with people that all have the same opinion as me.
Hmm.
I think that with faith, we have got to be in relationship with people outside of our own faith background,
Hmm.
or that is a really scary place to be. And I also just feel like the world that we're living in now is so divided. It's becoming more and more divided. I'm worried about upcoming elections and things like that. So I actually think it makes church more divided, which it's like, why are we more divided? Like it's okay for someone to have a different opinion than you. And that's the problem, is we've got to learn to be around people, respect people that have different opinions than us.
Hmm.
And so if someone says, hey, I don't really like your values, like that's okay. They don't have to like my values. They don't have to, like the same people that I like or do the same things that I do. In fact, it's great that they're different, and being able to acknowledge differences and be okay with it.
Hmm.
Really with a faith-based background, everything is sacred.
Hmm.
Everything is beautiful and lovely. So instead of pushing people away that think differently, inviting them in, that they're sacred and they're lovely and they have something to give to me, even if they're not my faith background.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think about how, I mean, we see this a lot in families too, of like this divided, divisive experience around holidays, around like get-togethers when politics get brought up, or world events or conflicts get brought up, and people staunchly like stick to their side. Um, and it's tricky because like in a faith-based like coming from the belief system of most of these faith-based like religions or what have you, there's a sense of it's all created, we're all beautiful, we're all good, like there's love. But when sometimes the politics mean other people don't have equal rights or are now responsible for huge life changes that they have to bear, because somebody else made that decision for them, or these kinds of things, like I can see how people get more staunchly stubborn ultimately around their beliefs because it feels so precious to each person. Um, like I've been on a mission to be less self-righteous as a human being since peak self-righteousness around like 2020. And I'm trying hard and trying to listen to people I adamantly disagree with and also feel torn with like I can listen to somebody and I can respect them and I don't want them to take my rights away or my friends' rights away because they don't like the choices we would make. That kind of thing.
I love this. I love this. And how does that change you?
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm a firm believer in there's something to be learned from listening to the other sides, right?
Mm.
And to see the humanity in the other side. Cause I got really good at dehumanizing people in my mind there in like 2020, which I hate to admit, but is the truth. Um, and so seeing the humanity and them being so dug in, and I'm talking about real people in my life, not politicians who I think often have different agendas, but the people within my life who have deeply held beliefs that are opposing my deeply held beliefs, like seeing that like this is also like this is an aunt I love, like we can disagree and she's still a good person,
Mm.
and I hate that she's not seeing the humanity in some people I love, that kind of thing.
That
um
hurts.
yeah, and trying to love her through it. um
Mhm.
and I think especially when those justifications are brought back to Christianity in the case I'm thinking of, of like, well, I think this way because I'm a Christian, as if Christians are all like it's a monolith and everybody thinks the same, which is not accurate. Maybe in her church or in her town, that's what it feels like. Um, but I think that there's a lot of pandering to the Christian community that happens in politics when many of the values that they're pandering are not actual Christian values.
Yes. Hmm. And so I love this because you're speaking to this idea. You're kind of practicing learning to love greater, right?
Hmm.
This is the practice that we all should have, especially as therapists. And it's going to make you a better therapist in the therapy room because of the way you're choosing to listen to your aunt and love her, even when she has a different opinion than you.
Hmm.
And what's sad, and I don't know if this is what your aunt is like, but sadly, with some people, they can't handle that,
Right.
right? They can't. Can I read a quote for you?
Yeah.
This is Richard Rohr. He's a Catholic priest. He's like my favorite. I adore this man. And he says here in his book, Universal Christ, I cannot help but think that future generations will label the first 2,000 years of Christianity as early Christianity. They will, I believe, draw more and more of the massive implications of this understanding of a cosmic Christ. They will have a long discarded notion of Christian salvation as a private evacuation plan that gets select humans into the next world. The current world has been largely taken for granted and ignored unless it could be exploited for our own benefit. Why would people with such a belief ever feel at home in heaven, and they didn't even practice for it, nor did they learn how to feel at home on earth?
Hmm.
And it's this idea that faith is this evacuation plan that we have to get to, or we have to be, and we got to get everyone on the boat. Like
Hmm.
that is an old way to think about faith. And there's a new way to think about faith, which is exactly what you're speaking to, this ability to be with people, to be with our clients. And it's not about getting them to a certain place in their
Hmm.
religion. It's about just being with them. And then that's the transformation. Like we need that as therapists.
Hmm.
Our clients transform us, and then transform people transform people. So
Right.
we're being transformed, you're being transformed in your conversation with your aunt, and then you're able to give that to other people.
Hmm. Yeah. I think about how that shows up in the therapy room, right? Like I'm imagining if my aunt wasn't my aunt, but was a client, and some of the things she says would deeply offend me. And I don't have that relationship with my client that I have with my aunt, right? This is somebody I've just met. Um, how and because so much of it is tied to faith, that's why it feels relevant to this conversation. Like, how do you navigate that? Because I'm sure, like, since Christians aren't a monolith, I'm sure that there are Christians coming into your office that are sometimes saying things that offend you, or the clinicians that work for you, and call like saying that it's rooted in Christianity. How do you navigate that?
Mm-hmm. For me, it's understanding that I can't change them,
Hmm.
and it's not my job to.
Hmm.
We are all on our own path and our own journey. And so, even so, as a Christian, I believe that everyone is on their own path, and that really God or the Holy Spirit is the only one that can help this person really get to where they need to be. If I say something or do something that helps with that, fantastic. But it's not for me to get them fixed. It's
Hmm.
for me to join them in whatever it is path that they are on, right? We can't change people's minds. You can't go to your aunt and say, that's wrong, blah, 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 because she's not going to hear any of that. But when you choose to join somebody, listen to them, that's when the transformation happens for them,
Hmm.
right? It's through love and acceptance, not through judgment, that their lives are going to be changed. So I have to kind of unattach myself from the situation.
Hmm.
I'm on my path, they're on their path. I also have to have humility to remember, like, hey, 15 years ago when I became a therapist, I had a very different idea of what life and faith was than I do now. And let
Hmm.
me just say, I'm probably gonna have a different idea of what that is 15 years from now, as I continue to grow on my journey. And I also have my own therapy.
Hmm.
My therapist lets me have my journey. She
Yeah.
doesn't tell me what I have to be. She helps guide me in my own faith and what God's doing in my life. And so that's what we do for our clients.
Hmm. Are there Are there times when people come into your practice, maybe they're dealing with religious trauma um, or something that would lead them to say a lot of negative things about a religion that your clinicians are a part of? How does that get handled both internally for a therapist and also externally in session when somebody's basically bashing something that you feel helps give your life purpose?
Mm-hmm. Sure, that definitely happens. If that's happening in a session with a client, I let them go down that road because
Mhm.
that's what they need at that moment. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. Like it's not to be taken personally. It's
Right.
their experience and what they are going through. And yeah, they might end up hating, for me, Christianity. I've had clients like that,
Hmm.
definitely. And so I join them in whatever it is that they're coming in for therapy for,
Hmm.
and let that be their journey, and I separate myself from it. And of course, if I have strong emotions about it, I'd get supervision about that specific thing to make sure that I'm not pulling in my biases and working with these clients. And if I start to see that like I just cannot separate, then I refer them to someone else,
Hmm.
that would be a better fit for them.
Yeah. And would you, like, if, because you were letting the session be about them this whole time, right? So how would you explain referring them out if they didn't know all along that they'd been saying things that were rooting in under your skin?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we could go back there. I do think it's okay for us as therapists to talk to our clients about that.
Hmm.
It's not to reprimand them, but to say, hey, when you bring this up, I actually have a background and this is kind of a little bit about that, because I think it's going to help clients understand things better, understand what they're saying better. It's the here and now of the therapy relationship. Like we are working through this now.
Hmm.
Um, but also teaching them about relationship, that you're not going to be in a relationship with everybody forever.
Hmm.
And maybe this is a moment that, we're not going to be able to work together, but I actually care enough about you that I would rather you work with someone who can really help you in this area that I just cannot separate myself. It's about me and
Mhm.
what I'm going through and not about what you're sharing.
Mhm.
You've done nothing wrong. So using it kind of as a teaching tool, I do think those are rare times though.
Mhm.
In most cases, the therapist needs to just do their own work.
Yeah.
They've got something going on that they need to work on, and it's going to come up in all their other relationships if they don't work on it.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm wondering too, like faith communities, like churches can be really tight knit, for instance. How do you handle it if there's somebody that you're seeing clinically who is also a member of your church and thus your smaller community?
Yeah, the Zoom went out for just a second. Can you
Ah,
ask that question again?
yeah, absolutely. So how do you handle it if there's somebody that's a part of your church, for instance, that is all of a sudden a client too? How do you manage that potential dual relationship in a close-knit community?
Yeah. So most of the time I try not to let that happen
Uh-huh.
because it can bring up problems. Also, I have had some clients come up to my husband, who's a pastor, and ask about me when I'm not there, and that's a little awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so if somebody from my community calls when I was a solo practice owner, I didn't have anyone like in the group to refer to. I was very honest with them, and we kind of talked about what they do at church just to make sure we weren't having that dual relationship. I
Mhm.
kind of made a rule for myself that if it's someone I would interact with on a regular Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or whatever, these are people I shouldn't be doing therapy with. So if they're in my Sunday school class, Bible study, maybe their kids are the same age as my kids who are doing stuff together, it's just best to refer those people out. And I actually just need my own space, to think
Yeah.
about me when I'm at church and not to think about my clients because I got work to do on myself.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so now a church I used to be at is very big here in Savannah, and we got a lot of referrals from there. I would say on a Sunday morning we're hitting 200-300 people. So
Wow.
it'd be very normal for them to show up at church and I would never see them, you
Mhm.
know. And so I would work with those clients. Well, we would discuss it in advance. Like if I see you on a Sunday morning, really, I'm not going to be saying anything to you, but you can approach me and say hello, but I want to make sure you feel comfortable, that kind of
Mhm.
a thing. Sorry, I think I just went on a tangent there about dual relationships.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, great. Yeah, but now that I have a group practice, I just almost always refer those people to someone else because it
Mhm.
just gets too dicey,
Yeah.
right? Right. And I think what you brought up here is so important is they might have a different way of thinking about even Christianity. You're talking about that with your aunt. It's like different people talk about faith differently, and it's the same faith. So that's interesting. So a lot of times, if a client is bringing something like that to the table, I do refer them back to their pastor.
Mhm.
Because there just gets a point where like I can't really answer those theological questions and I don't want to cause a rift in our relationship when really we're working on something else in therapy, like working on your anxiety about your job or whatever. And so if it's a deep faith-based question, I refer them back to that.
Mhm. Got it. And I know we've talked before on podcasts about things like praying in session and how that can be discussed, instigated, or something you choose not to do as a faith-based clinician. Can we talk some about that?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. We have to be very careful about prayer in session because of all the things we're talking about, because of trauma background with clients. I mean, and it could be a religious trauma background, but it could be any kind of trauma background.
Mhm.
Also, prayer can be an authority thing, right? So if the client is asking you to pray, it can become kind of like you're the authority in the room on faith, and you're kind of almost taking their faith from them
Mhm.
because they feel like, well, you do faith, I don't do faith, right? We want to empower our clients in that way. Also, when we pray, we close our eyes. That can bring up a lot for clients, fears and what's happening and all that kind of thing. And then they feel like they have to pray when they don't really want to pray. They're closing
Mhm.
their eyes when they really don't feel comfortable doing that. And they don't know what to say, right? They're like, I pray, what do I say? I mean, a lot of people are like that, even if you go to, a community outside your counseling room and someone's asked to pray, they're like, I don't know what to say before the meal. I don't know. Like
Mhm.
now we're stressing our client out. They don't know what to pray. So when a client is kind of with me in therapy and they say, "Can we pray about this?" I'll say, "Okay, tell me more about why you want to pray about it." So exploring the reason for bringing prayer into the room instead of just doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could say something like, "Well, I thought that you wanted me to pray." I'm like, "Oh, that
Mm-hmm.
like now we need to work on this relationship, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I try to get them to do the praying and not necessarily me to do the praying. They're the one that brought it up, and this is their faith and their experience. I want to do whatever's comfortable for them. And so asking them, how do they feel about praying in the room with me? What would that bring up for you? What is a way that can make this comfortable for you? If that's we pray with our eyes open, or maybe we just know that we pray outside of session for one another, not for one another, but for me, for my client. I do tell my clients that I pray for them. If
Mm-hmm.
they have a faith-based background and they're having a hard time with something, and they come to my mind outside of session, I let them know, hey, I thought about you this week and said a prayer for you. How did that go? My therapist does that for me,
Mm-hmm.
and it means a lot. It shows me how much she cares about me and that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just a client, get that money, get you out the door. I'm actually thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's super powerful with our clients.
Yeah.
Those are a couple of the ways that I address prayer in session.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting thing because when I think of Christian counseling, the schema that I have in my head, and I've never done Christian counseling, I've never been in Christian counseling, but the schema I have in my head is that there is like prayer in session. So I love that there's and that it's led by the therapist. So I love your view on that and the acknowledgement of that power differential. Um, which I don't know that I've ever considered. Like there was something that felt like maybe concerning to me about it, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And that's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And sadly, I do think that some Christian counselors are the way you just shared. Like, years ago, I met with another Christian practice owner. We were just talking shop, about the way we run our practice, the way we do therapy. And he made it very clear to me that he prays in every single session for every single client before they leave. And then everyone else in their practice does too. Almost making me feel like I wasn't a good enough Christian counselor because I didn't pray
Mm-hmm.
in every session. And I was like, whoo, like that is too much. It's too
Mm-hmm.
much. Like I'm a guide leading people in their journey. And if that means they grow in their faith, great. If that means they run away from faith, that's okay too,
Yeah.
because they're doing what they need to do. And if prayer comes up, beautiful. If prayer doesn't come up, that doesn't say one thing or another about that client's faith.
Mm-hmm.
You
Absolutely.
know, yeah, I mean, I do think there are lots of tools within the Christian faith backgrounds, really with even Buddhists and a couple of other backgrounds. I mean, there are some tools that we can integrate into therapy that are also therapeutic, and
Mm-hmm.
prayer is one of them. I don't have my research with me right now, but I have done a presentation on that before, and prayer is actually very effective to bring into therapy in the right way, and it brings a decrease in anxiety, depression, things like that. There are other things such as acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
being able to accept people from where they're at. Mindfulness. We talk about mindfulness all the time. Well, for a Christian, mindfulness really does come back to a prayer practice in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of bringing those things together. Community, very faith-based idea. In the same way, we know that community is going to decrease depression and anxiety for clients. So sometimes a client might come in and they hate church. I don't want anything to do with church. But by the time they've gotten through therapy, they're like, I just need friends in a community. And I'm like, okay, we'll try returning to church. And they do, and it actually goes well. And they're like, oh, I have friends again. This is great. And they feel a sense of belonging. They can
Mm-hmm.
feel a sense of calling in this, like churches do a lot of good work in the world, like volunteer work. So, sometimes clients, when they get involved in their church, they start giving or, they're doing stuff for foster children or whatever the case may be. And they're doing that through their church. So, you're kind of hitting a lot of birds with one stone and bringing in all these components that are resources to clients with community, with serving, with prayer. And so, church can really, or whatever faith organization can really bring that back together.
Right. When I think about how good volunteering and being of service feels for
Mhm.
people and how that altruism is um adversely correlated with depression, and how when you have an organization that is coordinating that whole situation for you, how much easier it is to then go and be of service instead of
Mm-hmm.
having to like find a way to be of service and trying to wrangle it with your calendar. If it's just set up for you, it's easier to do some good.
Yeah, yeah. And you're doing it with people with a like-minded background, people that you already have a relationship with. You know, you're seeing them on a Sunday morning or Saturday or whatever you're going to your faith organization. So then you're having these multiple contacts with the
Mhm.
same people, which I really think is helpful for clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
so then what are some like personal examination practices that Christian counselors specifically, maybe other people too, can do to make sure that they are covering their bases with their own value system while also supporting and prioritizing the value system of their clients?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it goes back to doing our own work, just like with anything, you know, faith
Mhm.
or any kind of idea, and then incorporating it into a regular basis into our lives, right?
Mhm.
That it's just not a one-time one done. So we have to have self-examination practices that are kind of our go-tos. For me, those are journaling is
Mhm.
a go-to practice for self-examination, dream work. I
Mhm.
love it. Because that's going to show us the stuff that's coming up. Go into your own therapy. I think every therapist should be going to their own therapy and diving into all areas of your life, including faith. Identifying your emotions that are coming up within session, whether they're strong emotions. So maybe even when your client leaves, having a notepad or a journal beside you saying, hey, you know, this is some stuff that came up. You're not sharing all the things about the client, you're sharing the things about yourself that
Mhm.
are coming up within your session. And attending church, you know, like that's
Mhm.
a place where you practice your faith and understanding yourself and
Mhm.
understanding clients. But curious, do you have any self-examination practices, Allison, that you do?
I do journal. I try to have white space in my
Okay.
life. I will often busy myself through my white space, so it's not something I'm as good at holding to, but just
Mhm.
it might be like a walk in the woods. Like I'm lucky to live in a place with lots of woods, and the woods are kind of the place that my brain calms down the most. So I try to have white space. I journal, therapy, um, good, deep, true talks with good friends
Oh yeah.
feels like good self-exploration for me. And noticing I have so many true friends that when if they say something that sparks something in me, I can just be like, oh, that just nudged me. Like, can we talk about it? And they do the same. So I think that those are my primary like self-examination practices.
Hmm.
Meditation, not as often as I feel like I quote unquote should be doing, but um, it happens some. So
Hmm. I love that. I love that you allow yourself to be in relationships and then be changed by them, you know, and let it stir
absolutely.
things within you and bringing those things to the table. And I think all too often when that happens with us, we run away.
Hmm.
That's such a good self-examination practice. The other one I didn't include here, and you probably could say something to as well, is exercising.
Uh-huh.
You know, we know that, like, so for example, when you run, I love running,
Hmm.
it makes your brain change, obviously the endorphins, but I've also read somewhere that it creates the same kind of pattern EMDR does when you
Oh,
do
interesting. That
when
would
you
make
run.
sense. It's very patterned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so within my mind, I work out stuff while I'm running
Hmm.
just the way you would kind of an EMDR, and it takes away that emotion and kind of understanding something. In fact, yesterday I was running, and all of a sudden the dream I had had, I was like, "Whoa, that's what it meant!" You know, like I had to,
Uh-huh.
and it was actually something very related to my work. So I
Hmm.
was really glad to have that moment of self exploration while I was running.
Hmm.
So we got to incorporate those self examination practices. I also think there's just some characteristics that we need to be thinking about. So the first one, I have three of them here. The first one is pride. It's letting go of our pride, letting go of the way that we see the world,
Hmm.
right? That we think we know the best way to see the world. And then let's just be honest, we're looking at the world through our own eyes anyway,
Hmm.
all the time. So even our clients, we are looking at them through our own opinion and our own pride. So we've got to practice humility,
Mhm.
seeing it's their journey, not ours. They might have just as great a faith as we do. We're
Mhm.
not necessarily the sage in the room that knows everything. They're the expert. Um, Another quote here is, we don't see things as they are. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we forget that I'm seeing it because of who I am, not because of
Mhm.
the reality,
Mhm.
right? The next one here is letting go of control, right? We want to
Ugh.
control the sessions.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
hard one for me, just in any area of life. Even
Uh-huh.
though I know control is a myth, like it's not anything we actually have, but it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to let go of my semblance of control in most areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going back to religious trauma, I think that's a lot of what the problem is with church is pastors want to control. They don't even realize they're doing it.
Mhm.
And they want to control the way that faith is done because they need to make the money and all these kinds of things. So I also think within our sessions, we want to control them because of our own ego state.
Mhm.
So we want to control their faith too, and that
Right.
is a really dangerous place to be in. So we have to let go of that. And when I was first a therapist, I would have all this agenda, right? I'd be like, here's the treatment we're going to do, here's the exercise we're going to do. And it's not bad to have some of that available, but I was so fixated on how that was going to happen. I had an agenda.
Mhm.
And then I realized that the client was missing out on therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so much of therapy cannot be with an agenda. And so
Mhm.
letting go of that control for me was what allowed therapy to become a beautiful thing. I mean, how many clients come in and they go, "Oh, I didn't know we were going to talk about this today."
Mhm.
Like, I know it's the very thing that you needed to talk about. Your psyche knew when it sat down that this is what you needed to deal with. And so we got to let go of that in all areas of control, including faith, right?
Mhm.
Um, Even Mother Teresa would tell the sisters that it wasn't her job to talk about Jesus.
Mhm.
It was her job to share it and be with people through the way she served, not through
Mhm.
telling people what to do. So
Mhm.
that idea of letting go and letting them have their experience. And then the last one I have here is letting go of your own judgments, right? So it's like, why do we feel this compulsion to judge people?
Mhm.
It's because we have our own problems.
Right.
Want to deal with them. So I'd rather just judge everybody else.
Mhm.
Right. So judgment should be your red flag for your own personal issues that are coming up, and letting those clients have their own experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, have you ever worked with a client who, I guess, communicated to you in some way that you weren't Christian enough for them?
Oh, who communicated that to me?
Yeah, like based on their own idea of what a Christian counselor does or what a Christian
Mhm.
is. I'm curious if you've ever gotten that messaging as a therapist.
Yes, that was the guy I was sharing about earlier
Mhm.
who had a practice in town who
Mhm.
basically got onto I felt like he was getting on to me for not praying with my clients.
Right, right.
Yeah, basically telling me I'm not Christian enough in my practice. And I think that years ago that probably would have really offended me, but now I kind of laugh about it and I actually feel a lot of empathy about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel sad that someone would think that way, but also allowing myself to separate. Like that's his practice.
Mm-hmm.
This is mine. And I have been told by clients they come to my practice because they didn't feel like that agenda was put on them,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Right.
But there are some clients that really want that strong Christian background and they want to pray in every session. And great, you can go to that practice and get whatever it is that you need because this is your therapy. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing mine differently.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I do feel like, again, this culture of of counseling in general, we're
Mm-hmm.
all egomaniacs, but Christian counselors, they want to be the best Christian counselor,
Mm-hmm.
right? They want to do those practices and all these things, and there becomes a competitiveness there and a judgment there. So we're really judging one another because we're insecure about what we're actually doing,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to rethink that. But just letting go and loving people and letting them go, because me holding on to that resentment is only going to hurt me. It's only going
Mm-hmm.
to hurt my own practice with my clients and with my staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think letting go of that has been really important.
Yeah. Yeah. What can Christian counselors do to support clients who are maybe separating from the church while trying to maintain faith? Before we hit record, I should say we talked about some stats you were saying about the like church attendance is different now than it once was. Maybe
Yeah,
we
I
talk
can go
about
there.
that first, and then we'll talk about how to support clients who are struggling with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, stats about church have greatly changed, especially because of COVID, right?
Mm,
So much came up with the way people think about faith, but also politics, and they got all intermingled in this yucky way. So I'm going to read you some statistics here. In 2022, Lifeway did a study and found that 27% of Americans are considered regular churchgoers.
mhm.
27%. More than once a month is a regular churchgoer. This has been down by 15% since 2018. So in those 4 years, it went from 42% to 27%,
Huh.
which I actually thought a lot of Americans went to church. And obviously, you and I are more in the Bible Belt area, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, one in four basically is going to
Mhm.
church at least once a month. Um, for those that are attending church at least weekly, the numbers dropped by more than half. In 2019, the first year, there were more churches closing than opening.
Mm.
It continues to be that way, that more churches are closing than opening. Adults ages 18 to 22 who attended church regularly in high school, we found out that 7 out of 10 had stopped attending church regularly after that.
Mhm.
So 70% of people stopped going to church after high school.
Mhm.
So, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, why are these statistics? Why are people not attending church? Well, I don't know. What do you think, Allison?
Well, you kind of gave me the answer, so I don't want to cheat.
Yeah, okay. One of them is judgment,
Hmm.
right? People feel judged when they do go to church. And I've had many clients, especially college age clients. It's really interesting. They'll come in and they'll talk about their church background. And I'll be like, well, did you enjoy it? And they're like, well, I did for a while, but then people started judging me.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, well, did people say something to you? Most of the time they didn't. It's just the feeling they got when they went to
Hmm.
church. They feel judged, which usually means they're feeling judged in a lot of other places, and it's a distortion, right? But I always like to bring them back to this idea of, so you're going to let other people's thoughts dictate your actions? If you like church and you feel like it's helpful for you, why would you stop going? Because maybe the person beside you is thinking this. Plus, don't let your actions be dictated by someone who's a jerk.
Hmm.
You know, do
Yeah,
things because you want to do them and you find value. And then obviously don't do the mind reading
right.
because you have no idea what that person's really thinking.
Hmm.
But a lot of people stop going to church because of judgment. They stop because the church is hypocritical,
Hmm.
right? They feel like people are imposing their beliefs on them, right? So these are things that we need to think about with therapy too,
Hmm.
that we're not replicating that as therapists, judgment, making it difficult for people to come. And then the other reason that they found in the study that people didn't go to church was logistics, just flat out scheduling, that it was difficult to make it. So, we want to make that as easy as possible for people. So just like
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah. When I think about that feeling of judgment, and I think you're right, that could be some like projection, but I also do hear from a lot of people that it's clicky, it's you're not always fitting in, those kinds of things, just like with any kind of community. But this also, church also has that underlying, um, not all church, I should say. Not all church has the underlying vibe of like, do it right, be the right kind of Christian, those kinds of things.
Yeah, but it certainly does have a lot of that. You're correct. Right. And so, for someone who would say they're a Christian therapist, I think of them on the front lines of all this. Like you're on the front lines of changing the way people think of Christianity
Hmm.
because they're
Yeah.
having an encounter with Christianity when they come see you every week.
Hmm.
right? So the church is declining because of people, because
Mhm.
people are getting set in their ways, they're not doing their own work, they're becoming judgmental. And so we've got a mental health crisis in the world, but we also have a faith crisis,
Mhm.
and so if we don't change the way that we're doing faith, it's only going to continue to decline,
Mhm.
right? So we haven't really hit this topic, but within the Methodist Church, I'm not sure how much you know or don't know, and I'm a Methodist. There has been a split recently in the church over the homosexuality issue.
Mhm.
And so I look at that and I'm just like, wow, like the church is already tanking. And now we're going to tank over this issue, which shouldn't be an issue anyway.
Mhm.
And it's just sad and disheartening. And so, like, as therapists, how are we going to bring more community, more acceptance, and more love to a denomination organization that's crumbling,
Mhm.
right? Like, being a therapist is about our room and clients coming into the room. But once you're a therapist, you're always a therapist.
Mhm.
How are we representing mental health, wholeness, love within our communities and in our churches without
Mhm.
being judgmental?
Right. Right. And I think of that too, of like in like an organization, like maybe some other denominations where um gay folks aren't accepted. Like it's just very much like Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Like those denominations can be so loud and can be so much louder than the ones that are loving and accepting and willing to really be there for all the people in the congregation. How, as therapists in session, can we like model some of the loudness combined with the goodness and the acceptance and the love? Like how can we do that as we talk about faith with our clients, or how do we model that? Like, I don't know if this is a full question, but
That's okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then we're talking about ethics here too,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know the ethics on homosexuality. Like, if a couple comes in and their goal is to be together, it's not our agenda to pull them apart because, oh no, we don't like homosexuality, right?
Hmm.
And so we got to also like bring in the ethical part. So, regardless of your faith background, I mean, even though I am strong in my faith, ethics trumps it for me. Like,
Hmm.
there's a reason those ethical principles have been put in place because it's caused harm in the past to people. And so
Hmm.
that should be something we're thinking about. Like, am I causing harm to people because of what I think? Because
Hmm.
of my own religion and background. Um, so it's a really important concept to be able to take your ethics, make sure it's lining up with the values within your practice. And I think that's just the perfect example within the faith-based community. That's a struggle. But again, this goes to us pointing them in directions that allows people to find God, to find love, to find acceptance. And sadly, these churches that are louder, that are pulling away, they're going to die out. They're going to die
Yeah.
out because our world is changing. As I was saying earlier, it's like the whole faith community is changing. And if people don't get on board with that, the actual life of the gospel, what Jesus, these principles that Jesus lived out, it wasn't a bunch of rules. It was actually changing the rules. We have got to get away from that rule setting within faith and it's got to become the concepts that we're living out.
Hmm.
It's going to die.
Yeah. I'm
Mhm.
not sad about some of that, I'll be honest.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I know. And so we're here to make changes on that.
Hmm.
And we're all making changes on that, regardless if you call yourself a faith-based person or not. You are doing faith by the way you're loving people.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I say any kind of work we do is good work. I had a friend that said she's a Catholic. She actually converted to Catholicism, so that's like a really intense conversion right there.
Hmm.
And she has mental health stuff going on, and so she saw a psychiatrist, and she said it was the best one she ever saw, and that psychiatrist was an atheist.
Hmm.
And she said the Christian people were not doing it for her. And I was like, wow, like good work is God's work, regardless of what someone says their faith background is.
Hmm. Hmm.
I love that.
Well, on that note, I feel like um I really appreciate you being willing to talk. We've had so many conversations on podcasts that like are different. Well, I don't have a religion, but like you being religious, me not being religious. I just love that we can always talk openly with different experiences. And I always learn every time I get an opportunity to talk to you. So thank you very
Oh, thank
much.
you. Well, I always really enjoy being with you as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you and have a really great day.
Thank you.
I hope that broadened your clinical horizons. Head over to notboringces.com to get your CE credit. Want to have a not boring conversation with me about your clinical area of expertise? You can apply there too. If you like this conversation, leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and be sure to subscribe for future conversations.